Maimane is fighting what he calls an attempt to remove him as DA leader. He's facing 2 scandals in as many weeks. He's accused of driving a vehicle gifted by Steinhoff and not being truthful about the ownership of his Cape Town house. Maimane is maintaining his innocence. Let's chat some more about this now with political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Sanusha, a very good evening to you. Thanks for your time. I mean, what do you see as going on here? Do you see anything dodgy? First, let's start with the house and the car. And do you see this as anything dodgy on Mmusi Maimane's part, or just poor political judgment?
Good evening, Yuveka. I think it's really around the question of how the judgment, as you say, comes around in terms of analyzing, auditing, and of course coming back to the internal dynamics within the party as well with regard to this question of the car. Particularly because it's to my mind, and I stand corrected on this, but the way I've read it is that it goes back to 2016. Now, obviously, there's been issues around political party funding, and there's legislation that needs to be implemented, and we have many cases that could be a litmus test for this political party funding legislation. And I think this is where some of those grey areas and those overlaps need to be understood and need to be unpacked in the context of what does it mean in terms of what's going on. Now, obviously, you know, the way Mr. Maimane responded to it, and I think today's interview with your station kind of also gave a sense of how confident he is, but over the weekend, his response to it was, it's a smear campaign, and he stopped. Obviously, what he did today in the interview with your reporter, he actually got into a little bit more detail about this. He's very confident that this is not going to be a kind of noose around his neck. It's not going to break him. It's not going to it's people within the party who are resisting transformation and change, and they're talking about this in the way. But it's a very serious issue, because what it does is that it talks to the broader political landscape of how these big party funders, like the big corporates, can get into your space, and then of course the image of reputational risk, credibility, and all of that becomes part and parcel of how you as the individual has to deal with this. Just to say that I think it's very, very interesting that Mr. Maimane finds himself on the other side of the parapet, and more importantly, sitting perhaps in the same side as he accused President Ramaphosa of the whole connection to the former Bosasa CEO.
Should we be obsessed though with the talk of coup plots by apparently by racists within the party, or should we really be questioning Mmusi Maimane's leadership, however they seem to be going about trying to get rid of him? If that is the case, we know for a fact there are many people within the DA who don't want Mmusi Maimane there. We've long seen certain divisions as well, but should we be at this point questioning and looking at whether he is the right person to lead the party at this point?
I think that's the big question here, the question of whether his leadership has taken the party to the kinds of levels that they want to find traction in the electoral landscape. And of course, he came in at a time when the DA did really well at the local government election. Their traction, their performance exceeded, I think, in certain levels, their expectation. Obviously, in 2019, it's a different kind of landscape in 2019. The landscape has shifted tremendously. And the challenge, I think, for any leader in any political party today in South Africa is how they manage to create that level of engagement with the electorate. Now, here's the thing that's going to be a key for Mr. Maimane. He's talked about honesty, he's talked about clean governance, he's talked about the level of transparency and accountability. And here he is now being placed in the very opposite direction of that by members within his party, as he alleges. And of course, we can't ignore the fact that there are factions and different power struggles and battles for power taking place within the DA. Just thinking about that, the report that came out yesterday, testing the waters by the Institute for Race Relations in certain ways, about, is there a time for a leadership change in the party? These are not disconnected issues.
Yeah.
Everything has to be seen as the way in which the dynamics of politics and power are playing itself out.
I mean, he says he knows that there are a lot of people within the party, Sanusha, that want the old DA back. Now, we remember what the DA used to be called in the old days, where it actually came from, and he's determined. He says that he will not go, and he's determined. He says that they should prepare themselves. So, should he be preparing himself for quite a fight here?
I think everybody needs to be prepared. He needs to be prepared for the fact that there's a significant point here that perhaps he needs to understand. What level of confidence and trust does he have within the party? There are those spaces in the party that he definitely enjoys a level of trust and engagement and traction with. But are those spaces believers in the party in terms of the kinds of dynamics of power? And I think if we want to draw some kind of parallel and a mirror image of what happened in the ANC with these factions, and remember, the person who heads up the federal chair of the party is a very powerful person as well. And this is a key position that's going to come up in the meeting of the party in October. And this is going to be critical in terms of whether Mr. Maimane manages to get somebody who is in his camp in that space, or is it going to be the opposing camp or opposing camps?
I tell you, Sanusha, I think that he was certainly wishing that he had Patricia de Lille back there in his camp at the moment, and maybe they should have a few midnight phone calls to discuss what's really going on here.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, the parallels.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see how this pans out. Thank you very much, political analyst Sanusha Naidu.